Good morning, everyone. You're watching our 24 News show, morning show. Welcome. Today, we will have an interesting discussion about a topic or a matter we don't hear much about. It's the biodiversity crisis, which is not as famous as the climate crisis that has been making the headlines very lately, especially with the COP27. And that is why we have chosen to shed light on this matter this morning. I am having with me Stella Pohl, a senior global correspondent at Interpress Service News Agency, for more insights. Good morning, Stella Pohl. Good morning.
Good morning, Mariam.
Good morning. Thank you for joining the morning show. To begin with, what is the definition of biodiversity? What is it?
So biodiversity is practically the whole earth. It's the life that exists on the land and the life that exists in the water. So which means human, the ecosystems, the animals, the fish, all kind of life, all kind of living creatures that exist in this world, that is altogether, that is the biodiversity.
A report from WWF found an average 69% decline in global populations of mammals, fish, birds, and reptiles since 1970. 3/4 of the land-based environment and 66% of the ocean environment have been altered. Now, in light of these numbers, how can we describe the state of biodiversity today?
So when it comes to biodiversity, two things are happening very, very fast. One, as you said, there's been this WWF report, showing the decline in the number of species. So that's called biodiversity loss. And it's not just happening to the number of animals. We are also losing in a very, very fast rate. Animals that are currently endangered, they are going to be extinct. And then we are also losing precious trees. We are losing smaller creatures. We are losing the number of fishes, as you said. So that is one thing that is happening. The other thing that's happening is that mass decline of an ecosystem. So for example, in many countries, the entire coastline is now bare. The mangroves are gone. The other vegetation that existed there, supported people, that's gone. So these are the two most urgent things that are happening when it comes to biodiversity. And you mentioned climate change. So climate change and biodiversity are actually very integrally connected. So a lot of biodiversity loss that is happening is because of climate change.
All right. Now, what are the different reasons and threats that lead to biodiversity loss, Pohl?
The big reasons, as experts have pointed out, and the reason why, very recently there was a biodiversity conference, one is, of course, climate change. So because of climate change, it's affecting, it's causing global warming. That's affecting the human lives and the lives of animals as well as, so there is this big impact on biodiversity because of that. The other reason is the way that we grow our food, using pesticide, using all these chemicals into the soil that affects the quality of the soil, and in turn, then that affects the biodiversity, the growth of all food, all trees, vegetations, etc. Then there is, of course, pollution, the plastic pollution. So some of these are due to climate change, and some of these are more due to very unhealthy practices by humans.
Many scientists argue that today we are living through a sixth mass extinction, as the world population has hit 8 billion people very recently. Is the number of the population a threat to biodiversity loss, perhaps?
Not exactly, not at this point, because the Earth, what the Earth still has is enough to sustain the current population. But what we need is a change in the way we are trying to sustain ourselves. So while the number of people or the population itself is not a huge worry at this point, the real concern is how this population is trying to feed themselves. So we try to, as I mentioned, the harmful practices that we do, and also how we manage our economy. For example, every country spends a huge amount of money, and in altogether is 1.3 trillion US dollars that are put every year on pesticides and on chemical synthetic fertilizers, which then really badly impact biodiversity. So the population is fine as of now, but the way the population uses this biodiversity, this world, to feed itself and sustain itself, that needs to be urgently changed.
We have talked about the state of biodiversity and the reasons of the loss. What are the consequences and the impact of biodiversity loss on our societies and on our Earth today?
So I will give you an example that may be helpful for those who are listening to this. So let's say overfishing, and over-harvesting is a big issue. So there are, for example, in the coastal areas, there is this growing demand of abalone. There is this growing demand of certain, marine species as food. Some people don't even use it for food. They use it for, making themselves stronger, which actually is not even scientifically proven. So because of this growing demand, there is this stress. People are being asked to, harvest more and more and fish more, and because of that, it's leading straight away to decline of marine life in certain coastal areas. Now, people who live by the coastal areas, they completely depend on these fishes, these marine creatures for their livelihood. So what happens when these are all gone? All these marine creatures are gone because of over-harvesting, overfishing, making quick, fast money by some people. But then what happens? Then there is nothing to catch. And then what you do, you migrate because you have no livelihood, no jobs locally. So you migrate to another place. So this is just a small example. So in short, when biodiversity loss happens, it also means loss of jobs, loss of income, loss of livelihood, and then stress on people's life. Then people are forced to migrate, and that brings in conflict because when there is a mass migration, it always creates political conflict. So this is just a small example.
Since we have talked about the human's role in the damage made to biodiversity, how can the human act to counter the loss?
So I think you asked me about individuals, but definitely the bigger role should be played by the governments. But what individuals can do is, try to change a little bit of their current lifestyle. So for example, if you are an individual farmer, it's not easy, but you have to take that step to stop using synthetic fertilizer, or you have to stop using, throwing things in the sea, in the garbage in the sea. You have to stop throwing, minimize your use of plastic, for example. You can also, try to eat things that are locally produced, and that will not, lead to, importing a lot of food. You can go for locally produced food. So that will minimize the use of your energy. That will minimize the demand for food which is coming from other countries. Maybe they're collected in an unsustainable way or in a harmful way. So there's a few steps that I think each individual
It's true that biodiversity
make.
isn't a topic we tend to hear much about, as we have mentioned in the beginning and as we have said. But recently, almost 200 nations have agreed to protect a third of the planet for nature by 2030 in a landmark historic deal, the COP15 deal, which you have been covering. Well, the deal is aimed at safeguarding biodiversity. But can you tell us how will this deal benefit our nature?
So the deal that the countries have just agreed to adopt or to sign basically has a very big goal, and that is, protecting is called 30 by 30. So that basically means by 2030, which is just 8 years away, protecting at least 30% of our land and 30% of our water. So the biodiversity on both land and water, at least 30% of that must be protected by 2030. This is to minimize, or this is to make sure that there is no species extinction or no biodiversity loss. Now, what that means is that the countries now they have signed it here, at the UN, but they have to go back to their own countries, and in their own countries, whatever biodiversity policies or laws they have currently, they have to revise it. They have to change it, to make sure. So if a country has currently maybe, their current target is to protect 17% of 18% of forest. So they have to change it, this law, to make sure that by 2030 they are protecting 30% of all forests. They're protecting 30% of all marine species, all animals. So that is the big step, right, that every country has to take.
Biodiversity loss is just as catastrophic as climate change, but the solutions are linked. Stopping further damage to the planet requires big change. The COP15 deal is a good step forward. Thank you, Stella, for your intervention, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Miriam. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And this is it for today's discussion. But the morning